Welcome to the section of this video that deals with agar work. This is actually one of my favorite parts of mycology because it lets us become mad scientists. The instructions for this agar call for 49 grams per liter of water, and I weighed it out once and found that a tablespoon weighs about 6 grams, so I'll be making a little over half a liter, and I'm going to be using 3.5 tablespoons of mix. I found that measure works just perfect and it saves me having to weigh it each time. And you know, for years I mixed up my own with malt extract and yeast and agar, and by the time I spent my fuel running around getting all of the ingredients and then bringing the agar home and powdering it up in a coffee grinder and mixing it all together, you know what, I really wasn't saving much over buying the commercially prepared mix, and it's so much easier to do that that's all I do anymore. As you just saw, I put the powdered agar mix into the bottom of my bottle and then added a small amount of room temperature distilled water, and by gently swirling it around, all of the powder dissolves readily into the water, and then you can go ahead and add the rest. I like to stop about halfway and swirl it around a bit and then add the rest of the water. Next, I want to show you how I prepare the lids. Since most of us don't have a completely sterile laboratory for our agar to cool down in, we need to find some method for filtering it so that as the agar shrinks slightly as it cools, it's going to be drawing in air, and we need to make sure we have a way to filter that. I take a synthetic filter disc and cut a small ring out of it, just the size that will fit inside the lid of the whiskey bottle, which I have drilled about a 1/4 inch hole in. Now this is the method I use, but there's other ways as well. In the section on grain preparation, you'll see I showed several ways of making filtered lids. We could cut a square of Tyvek and put that over the bottle and then screw our lid right down and trap the Tyvek between the lid and the threads. We could also drill a slightly larger hole in the lid of the whiskey bottle and stuff it with synthetic pillow stuffing. Any of these methods will work. Just as we did when preparing grain jars, we want to be sure and cover the top of our bottle with aluminum foil before sterilization. This will protect our mix from the water that drips down from the lid of our sterilizer during the cycle. The next step of the process is to sterilize our agar. And you can see here I have a lot of water in the pressure cooker. It's probably 8 or 10 centimeters deep. Now, the reason I do that, boil over is a very common problem when people do agar, and the reason being as the pressure cooker cools, the large surface area of the pressure cooker exposed to the air cools faster than the actual agar inside the bottle, and what that does is it causes the agar inside to boil over. And what I have found is by using a lot of water in the pressure cooker, you have more thermal mass and it makes it cool slower, and it eliminates the problem of boil over. Sterilize for 30 to 40 minutes at 15 psi or 100 kPa. At the end of your cycle, just shut off the stove and walk away for about 2 hours. Don't do anything to try to speed up the cool down, or you will boil over your agar and probably ruin your filter and lid. You're going to need to take advantage of that 2 hours to clean your work area anyway. You want to wipe down all of your surfaces with alcohol. You want to spray oust into the air to kill any airborne bacteria. And you want to run your flow hood for at least an hour. I like to run it for that whole 2 hours while my agar cools, because we want to make sure the air in our workroom is nice and clean. You'll see I'm using the pre-sterilized plastic Petri dishes. I prefer them immensely over the glass ones. They're much lighter. Those heavy glass ones can be awfully slippery when your gloves are coated with alcohol. You'll note I'm rolling up the plastic bag in the flow of the laminar flow hood. I'm going to save this plastic bag, and once I've poured the Petri dishes, I'm going to slip them right back into the bag, and this will help keep them sterile as they cool. It'll also slow down the rate that they cool and help prevent condensation. Even with all the precautions I take to avoid boil over, it's very common for a little bit of your agar to seep out through the lid and the filter, so don't be surprised if your foil's a bit hard to get off. It's very common during the sterilization process that some of the powdered agar will settle to the bottom of your bottle, so just before you pour your Petri dishes, go ahead and give it a bit of a swirl to get all that stuff in suspension again. Now you'll notice also, as extra protection, perhaps it's going the extra mile, but it doesn't hurt. I spray alcohol on the neck of the bottle before I take the lid off. I've allowed the agar to cool in the pressure cooker, and then it went from the pressure cooker immediately to the laminar flow hood. It was covered with foil and a filtered lid, but it doesn't hurt. You just cannot be too clean when you're working with agar. You'll notice I've allowed the agar to cool to the point that I don't need any heat protection whatsoever for my hands. The biggest reason for doing that is the cooler the agar is when we pour it, the less condensation we're going to have on the lids of our Petri dishes. Now notice how I hold the stack of Petri dishes. I've divided the sterile bag of 20 Petri dishes into 2 stacks of 10. You can lift 10 Petri dishes at a time this way, and then you'll notice as I pour the agar at each section, I give the bottle a slight twist. That cuts off the flow. Now I'm using the 3-section Petri dishes, so I have to do 3 times the work to fill each dish because I have to cut off the flow each time for each section, so it's a little bit more work, but I really like these 3-section Petri dishes. You can get a lot more experiments done in the same number of dishes. Now note how close the Petri dishes are to the flow hood. This keeps them right up in the sterile flow, and you can see how handy these long-necked whiskey bottles are for pouring agar. It allows you to keep your hands well outside of the range where any possible contaminants that might get knocked off your hands are not going to get into your agar. And also note the stack of Petri dishes, the way I'm holding them, no part of my fingers or hands are overlapping underneath, so that when I lift the dishes up, there's no chance that any contaminants on my hands, even though I am wearing sanitized gloves, there's no way that anything is going to get blown into the dishes from my hands. You can see I'm reinflating the bag and the sterile air from the laminar flow hood. I'm just going to slip the bag right over these Petri dishes, and that will help to protect them as they cool. I'm going to leave the flow hood running for about another 2 hours until they're completely solidified, and then I'll tuck the bag in underneath the bottom Petri dish, and that will protect them until I'm ready to inoculate them. Okay, now it's your turn.